Over the last 45 years, the Chinese state executed a sustained domestic development program that elevated 800 million citizens out of absolute poverty. Executing macro projects over multiple decades requires navigating enormous logistical and political complexities. In Western administrative systems, this scale of ambition frequently devolves into institutional gridlock, where basic infrastructure is delayed by years of litigation and bureaucratic friction. Yet China rapidly materialized thousands of miles of high-speed rail, ultra-modern logistical ports, and comprehensive transit networks without succumbing to that paralysis. By contrast, competing global systems often produce empty legislative halls and stalled initiatives, constrained by a structure that prioritizes procedural debate over physical execution. A common reflex is to attribute China's development entirely to authoritarian central planning, but state authority alone does not guarantee competence. Consistently executing complex logistical feats over half a century requires a deeply ingrained socio-cultural operating system. We can define the engine of this operating system as conscience efficiency. We can map this concept mathematically. This equation calculates conscience efficiency, or CE. The numerator here is I sub m. This represents the total macro project output, the actual physical creation of global connectivity and societal infrastructure. To maximize that output, the system must drastically shrink the two variables in the denominator, t representing the temporal delay of bureaucratic gridlock, and f sub c representing the operational friction of partisan dispute. The mechanism driving those denominators down is not a modern invention. To understand China's contemporary economic trajectory, we must deconstruct the ancient three-part philosophical synthesis that powers it. The first structural pillar of this operating system belongs to Confucius. Confucian philosophy operates on the axes of ren and yi, benevolence and righteous duty. These principles do not view a person as an isolated atom, but rather embed the individual firmly within a strict web of mutual societal responsibility. That ancient ethical baseline is the direct blueprint for modern Chinese macroeconomic policy. When an entire governing structure is built on a web of mutual obligation, the resulting economic model naturally prioritizes the collective physical good over the accumulation of individual wealth. Constructing massive energy grids to connect remote populations functions as a macro-Confucian duty. It secures stable livelihoods for the collective through physical connectivity. Western economic systems frequently allocate capital based on short-term financial speculation, optimizing for quarterly corporate returns. By contrast, the Chinese model relies on the objective reason of societal longevity, bypassing the hyper-individualized rationalization required to justify purely profit-driven capital extraction. Confucianism provides the deeply ingrained structural mandate. It supplies the high output in our equation's numerator, the drive to build and maintain the physical foundation of the society. The second pillar requires flexibility, derived from Laozi and the tenets of Taoism. Central to Taoism is the concept of ziran. This is the principle of spontaneous, unforced natural flow. It demands that you adapt to the terrain as it actually exists, rather than forcing a preconceived shape upon it. Over the last 45 years, Chinese economic reformers characterized their methodology as feeling the stones to cross the river. This is the direct application of ziran to national policy. Instead of applying a rigid, artificial formula to complex, evolving societal problems, the state tests solutions in real time and scales what works. In Western development, economies are often tethered to dogmatic textbooks, whether it is the market fundamentalism of the Washington Consensus or rigid interpretations of Marxist theory. Rejecting ideological dogma gives the Chinese system a high velocity of adaptive reasoning. When a global condition shifts, the policy pivots instantly to match the new physical reality. Taoist flexibility bypasses years of ideological debate. It aggressively minimizes the temporal response time in our equation's denominator. The final pillar of the axial trio supplies the psychological component of the engine, the teachings of the Buddha. The Buddhist philosophical objective is precise: clear away the illusions generated by the ego to observe reality strictly as it is, without distortion. The Buddhist practice of removing ego-driven illusion translates to a clinical, objective view of physical reality. This shift allows economic planners to ignore public relations and media-fabricated fear, focusing instead on tangible resource allocation. Western hegemonic systems frequently operate within an atmosphere of media-fabricated fear, relying on electoral theatrics and partisan scripts to manage populations. Because it lacks those illusions, the Chinese economic planning apparatus is able to maintain a clinical, highly objective view of the physical world. Decisions are anchored to tangible metrics. The focus remains strictly on securing trade routes, advancing scientific education, and expanding physical capacity. By stripping away the delays caused by political theater and corporate lobbying, Buddhist clarity directly reduces the operational friction in our formula. These three philosophical streams do not operate in isolation. They form an interlocking functional societal framework. Confucian relation, Taoist spontaneity, and Buddhist clarity lock together to create a single, highly efficient structural engine. The Taoist and Buddhist inputs stabilize the system, actively compressing both the temporal delay and the operational friction. With the friction cleared, the Confucian mandate pushes a massive, uninterrupted flow of resources directly into the physical output of the society. This synthesis forces the state to prioritize functional collective reasoning. It marginalizes the hyper-individualized legal rationalization that dominates other global models. A system wired this way cannot be easily paralyzed by endless litigation or gridlocked by the financial checks of corporate lobbyists. This axial synthesis is the precise mechanism driving China's remarkably high baseline of conscience efficiency. The implications of this formula extend far beyond domestic infrastructure. We must apply the conscience efficiency model to the geopolitical stage. The Western hegemonic model functions as an inherently low CE system. It relies heavily on external legal ledgers, abstract treaty compliance, and rigid dogmatic containment strategies. Operating with such high operational friction, this system inevitably yields zero-sum geopolitical outputs. It expends trillions of dollars on military encirclement and the maintenance of overkill arsenals. This map visualizes the contrast. The confluent Chinese model outputs a high CE geopolitical strategy. Instead of engaging in the friction of military containment, it bypasses those blockades entirely by constructing multipolar networks of commerce and physical infrastructure across continents. This approach acknowledges a basic structural reality. Mutual economic development generates global stability, while zero-sum military containment generates global friction. This model prioritizes domestic stability through physical infrastructure. Consequently, the lifting of 800 million people out of poverty was achieved through internal structural efficiency rather than through military expansionism or the fabrication of external crises. When a society successfully strips away the artificial filters of fear and dogmatic overregulation, it frees its collective energy to execute at an immense scale. Operating this engine requires a society to find its zhang, the unbiased, universal center of gravity that balances execution with clarity. The data proves the efficiency of the axial synthesis. The question that remains is how Western nations can recover their own internal zhang to lower their crippling domestic friction.